Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell and welcome to another CIQ demo. So today I'm going to be showing you a little bit that I learned about list slicing. I was kind of trolling the internet for video fodder and I went down a rabbit hole to another rabbit hole to yet a third rabbit hole probably. And I found something called list slicing. And then from that, I found out that loop control has extended options. I'm going to show you those really quick and kind of how they react and how you can maybe use them in a couple of different ways. So oftentimes, I'm going to be iterating over a list in my automations like this. I would say that's super common. And it's not usually a hard-coded list. Most often, it is one that I'm going to go and I'm going to retrieve somewhere. I'm going to run some task that's going to go and pull some information, create a list out of it, and I'm going to iterate over it to perform some kind of operation. And so you can think of a list kind of like an array. Essentially, it's a variable that has a whole bunch of stuff that I want to operate against in some way, right? So I want to loop over that list, right? Start at thing 1, then go to 2, then 3, and then perform these actions on it. And Ansible makes it really easy to do that with the loop operation. It used to be kind of like with items, and now we use loop, although with items still works. There used to be a lot of actual with things like with flattened and other things like that. So most of those have kind of been consolidated into loop. So if you are looking at some old playbooks and you ever run across those things, just realize those were the old ways they actually implemented some looping. But list slicing, as demonstrated here, so in this very first task that you see here, well, actually, let's start kind of at the top. You see in the var section, I've created a var called my list, and it consists of A, B, C, D, E. So just kind of some simple dummy data that you can iterate over that we can see what's going on here. If I take a look at the very first list, I'm really just doing debug on all of these. Really, I'm just spitting out information to screen. But here I'm using the loop option, and inside of there I have a list, right? My list, I'm referencing it, but you can see I'm doing the brackets, so I'm actually specifying kind of iteration information inside. So oftentimes, whenever you are operating and you see the kind of the brackets and you have a number in there, you're really designating which specific thing inside that list I put in there. So if I just did bracket for bracket, that would be E, because it technically starts at 0, right? So in a lot of programming languages, the index starts at 0. So the very first item in there is 0. The very next item is going to be 1, and then 2, and then 3, right? So it kind of moves down there. And I know for lay people, that's a little weird. Those that have done some computer science in the past, this feels familiar, right? So it's not so weird. So generally, you're just going to be specifying kind of an individual item with a number. Here, we have options inside of there. So instead of just specifying a number, I can actually do number colon number colon number. So the very first number is where I'm going to start, colon. The next number is where I want to stop, colon. After that, it's how many numbers I'm going to skip as I'm moving through. So by default, it's 1, which means I'll go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. If it was, say, set to 2, I would go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, right? It'll count by 2. If I had the number set as 3 on the index, and you kind of that third column there, it would count by 3s. I can't think of too many instances where I would want to use that. I'm sure it exists for a reason. So by default, I usually just leave that here. But in this example right here, say for example, I did want to, I said example too many times there. Now, say for example, I did want to skip the very first item, which happens sometimes, right? So sometimes whenever you return information, it'll actually, the very first entry will be kind of, say for example, the count of how many things list in this array. So say it's, like for our example here, say 0 would be 5, because there's like technically 5 things in there, and then it would start at 1 for A and then B, right? So if you're pulling information and it returns that way and I want to skip that very first entry, I could do it like this. So I can say start at 1 and then colon nothing, and that means just continue on all the way to the end. There's no finish. Right, just which is all the way to the end, and also don't set an index count. So really, we're just going to start at 1 and we'll move our way through. So if I take a look at my example here and I skip over to my output, so this should be my slicing output. You can see right here, we did B, C, D, E. So we skipped A, right? So it said essentially start at iteration 1, right? Because really we start at 0. So start at number 1 and then move on the way down through there. So there have been instances, again, where you want to skip the very first entry. This is a really succinct way of doing that, right? If you kind of look at it, there's not a whole lot to it there. Really, I'm just very compactly grabbing that information. Now, say, for example, quick commercial break. So here at CIQ, we absolutely love helping customers build their automation environment as well as their automation practice. We have also become experts in migrating from one flavor of enterprise Linux over to another. I think you know which one is going to be my preferred for you to move to. So if you need help with enterprise Linux or migrations or automation, please give us a holler. Plus, Jimmy's getting bored and he tends to get really annoying when that happens. So I genuinely need your help to keep him busy. So drop us an email. And this has been real life. I've had to do this before. If you look at my second example, it looks almost the same, except the very first start column, I leave it blank. So I want it to start at the very beginning, right? Like item 0, index 0, start there. And in the second column, I want it to not go to the very last one. I want it to be one before it. And so I actually did -1. I couldn't find any documentation, but I tried it out because this actually works in a lot of other programming languages. And sure enough, it'll take the very last entry, which would have been 4, and just subtract 1, so 3. And so it's essentially saying stop at 1. So if I wanted to skip the very last 2, I could say -2, right? So it'll take that very last index and boop, boop, move over a couple of spots. And if we take a look at the output right here, you should see it showing A, B, C, D. We're leaving off E, right? So that very last entry isn't getting put in there. So again, really quick ways of skipping initial entries, skipping end entries. I could put a static number in the beginning, static number at the end, and we'll always read kind of that chunk of information in there. So I don't know that it's always going to be useful for you, but I thought it was actually pretty cool, pretty clever way of doing that. Now, I know there are some other ways of accomplishing the exact same stuff. So I thought I would show you the example here. In this task, I'm using a conditional in here. I'm doing a debug again. I'm looping over my list, only I'm enabling loop control extended. So there are some additional extended options, which until I was kind of looking through this stuff, didn't realize existed, but you have to turn them on for them to be available, right? And so you add the loop control option down at the bottom, and then extended true, that cranks that stuff on, and now it's available to you. So Ansible _loop, you see in the conditional section. So when the Ansible loop dot first, essentially it will tell you if this is the very first time you're running this loop, dot first will equal to true. If it's not, it'll equal to false. And so here I'm just saying when it's not the very first run, go ahead and spit out the information, right? Spit it out to screen. So essentially it's operating the exact same way as the first one up there. A couple of more options. Of course, there are extra things that are available to you in the extended options. I'm going to show you those here in a minute, but let's pop back to the output and you should see, so that was what it looked like when we ran it the very first time, right? With the list slicing. So whenever we are using the output with the extended stuff right here, you can see we're looping through. It says skipping for item A, because remember we did a conditional. Anytime a conditional, the condition isn't met, it just says skipping, right? It doesn't do okay or change. Skipping is what you're expecting. And then you can see B, C, D, E. So on the first ones, there was no skipping option, right? Because it essentially removed that from the list of things we were going to operate over. Here, it's still going to operate over the entire list, except doesn't meet the condition, so it skips. So it performed exactly what we wanted it to do, just in a different way. So taking a look here, I was using the message option, right, on the debug module. And so the debug module has a couple of parameters you can put in there. You can do message or you can do var. Message allows you to craft a message, have it show up exactly as you want. I noticed, and I often use var, especially when I'm like debugging information, I just want to spit out the contents of a variable so I can see what's going on. If you use var, it actually spits out a whole bunch of extra stuff. It shows you all of the extended options as well. Like all of those show up in the message. And I didn't necessarily want that because it's not as clean, but I did show it to you on this second one, right? So it's configured identically, only it's using the var option. And when you use the var option, it spits a lot more out to screen. So let me move down here. So this is the loop control with the var option. You can see down at the very bottom, it's performing the exact same thing. Remember, we're skipping the first thing in the list. You can see the skipping section here. So whenever we actually are going to show it, it's going to just be item B. So if you look at the very bottom of that output, you can see item B, which is the very first thing in our iteration that we're actually going to operate against. It shows up there, but above it, you can see all of the additional stuff that it's collecting here. So all items, there's a Ansible _loop dot all items, and it'll show you everything that's in there, comma separated. I guess that could be useful in some respects if you wanted to use that. Only imagine that all items is 50 entries or 100 entries. This outputs can get a little bit messy, right? Not that that necessarily matters, because if I'm building a message and I'm spitting it out specifically, or say I'm building a report and I'm just dumping out the specific item contents that'll go there, it's just the var is showing all of this stuff here. But then we also, in those extended loop options, we have Ansible _loop dot first, right? That's again the true false condition that shows you, is this the first one? So now notice you have index and index 0. So remember how I told you that indexes generally start at 0, and our loops do that here in Ansible. Index 0 is going to be in that format. And so index is how many times have we made our way through the list, right? Are we on the first one? Are we on the second time? Are we on the third time, right? It kind of gives you that indication. So index 0 is assuming that the index, when it very first runs, starts at 0, and then goes 1, then 2, that's going to show you the output there. Now, if you wanted the index to be the very first iteration is number 1, the very second iteration is number 2, then that's just standard index. I know that's a little counterintuitive. Since the default is index 0, you would think that index would be the default, but they've kind of mixed matched it here. That is fairly useful because there have been multiple instances where I do a conditional, I'm looking for some piece of information, I need to know which order in the list. So in my conditional, I would say, hey, when, the contents equals whatever, and then I would check the Ansible _loop dot index or index 0, whichever is pertinent to what I'm trying to do here. So if I did dot last, that's going to be telling me, is this the very last one in the list, right? True, false. Length, it's going to show me the overall length of this list, right? So there's 5 things in there. You see it says 5, tells you what the next item is, what the previous item is. And then reverse index is going to be from the end. How far, or rather how close are we to the very end, right? So it's kind of doing the opposite direction, right? The regular index counts up. The reverse index is kind of counting down. How close are we to the end? And so they have the index 0 version as well as the regular index. So extra information that can be useful. I don't know that you're always going to be able to use this stuff, but if you ever run into a situation where you might need to do some extra processing or find that information, guess what? You've got an option for it there. Now, keeping that in mind, I was thinking, well, the length of things can be used pretty commonly. And so I have one here that's just spitting out the length options. You can see Ansible _loop dot length, but below it, I wanted to show you another way that you can check a list. So while the loop control extended stuff is interesting, it does kind of add some extra lines you have to add in there, and I am pretty lazy when it comes to this stuff. So in the very bottom one, you can see I can do the exact same thing with a couple of lines less, right? There's fewer lines. And so I'm using the length plugin. So I'm taking my list pipe, and that means I'm moving this to a plugin. And so just tell me the length of this list right here. And so it should theoretically accomplish the same thing. So if I skip to the very bottom here, I can see right here, we've got a message that's showing what was it? Ansible _loop. Right, yeah, Ansible underscore loop dot length is showing that right here. Well, let me scroll back down as 5. And then the other one is using the length plugin to display that the list is actually 5. So you get the same information. So I don't know that you're going to be able to use this super commonly, but I thought it was like kind of a cool trick, cool tip. I actually found and learned several things, which I love doing. Honestly, as soon as I learn something, it's going to fall out of my head. So this documentation is really a way for me to kind of come back and look at it. So I hope you enjoy this. If you find it useful in any way, I would be curious to hear how you actually would use it. If you would tweak or tune this, modify it, let me know about that. I love feedback. I love hearing what you guys are interested in, guys and gals and everybody in between. If you would love to see a different video, I am always looking for fodder. Give me materials to make this stuff. So tell me what you're looking to do. If there is nothing else, thanks for watching. Happy automating, happy slicing, and we'll see you next time. Bye.